overall airlines don't make money. It's such a low profit margin industry. So I think there's room to make better margins while making customers more happy by just trying some new things and really being connected to the actual customer experience.
Zach, it's so nice to have you here. Thank you so much for accepting my invite. We met a few weeks ago, I think initially online, and then you invited me to dinner. We are here in Lisbon. I just landed back from Dubai, and I was really looking forward to have this podcast with you. Welcome really here, Zach Resnick, and from Fly Flat.
Thanks for having me.
I have one main question that I always ask everyone who moved to Lisbon, which is, why Portugal?
Yeah, so there's so much to love about Portugal, and a lot of people I meet here come here, fall in love, and move. Where my process for moving here was actually fairly analytical. So I was living with my partner in Austin, Texas, and she wanted kind of a different, life situation. No longer wanted to live in that city. So we both, rather than say, okay, what cities do we want to live in, we more thought about what do we value and what do we want, and we kind of came to things like walkability, great weather, good cost of living, access to nature. And when we kind of researched the different places in the world that we felt were great on this, both of us independently with our own research came up with Lisbon. And even cooler, we then also prompted ChatGPT together. And this was a little over 2 years ago. So this was actually, I'd say, my first pseudo deep research that I ever did. And ChatGPT came back, funny enough, with Lisbon as the number 1 and Austin as the number 2. So basically, after that, we then just planned a 2-week trip where we'd come here and kind of explore different neighborhoods that were recommended to us. And after a couple weeks here, our conclusion was that we'd be happy to live in any of the neighborhoods and it'd be great. And then we were here, about 6 months after that.
That's amazing. So were you born in Austin, or you just lived there a couple of years?
I was born in New York City, and I grew up in the New York City area.
I see. That's so interesting. And how long have you been in Lisbon at this point?
About 1.5 years now.
All right. That's amazing. And look, one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on this podcast is because precisely as for the research regarding Lisbon, you are a super analytical person. And we spent probably 1 hour during that dinner with many people discussing about your business. And because actually you do something that I implicitly assume to be possible for many years. So I have so many questions for you. But first of all, do you want to introduce you a bit what you do with Fly Flat?
Yeah, of course. So Fly Flat has the absolute best deals in the world on long-haul international business and first-class tickets. And we deliver those tickets within a 24/7 white glove concierge platform that takes the best of real humans with experts that know how to do flights, they know how to talk to people, as well as best-in-class AI and technology. So for people that like to travel in business or first class, they don't like paying the retail prices, they don't want to have to deal with things themselves, they want to have a concierge with them all the time, we're a great product for them. Obviously, a lot of people here that are like, yeah, it's for me. Who doesn't like that? But of course, even a great deal on business class is still substantially more than economy or premium economy. So I'd say we feel like magic for people that already pay for business class, but sometimes even for people that don't often pay for it, we can get them pretty amazing deals that are maybe not as cheap as economy, but get closer to it.
That's great. And actually, especially for certain destinations, I always try eventually to get an upgrade. I always try to not pay the full price initially, and then to try, okay, do I receive an email, for example, from Emirates to get an upgrade at reasonable prices? But it's first.
Did you upgrade on your flight back recently?
So I tried, and that's why I'm going to really work with you, because we usually in the past it was a bit of that I was not going to Dubai, and I was used to get a specific email, so I had my process in place. It didn't work out this time, and we regret it so much because the flight was full, and at the same time I didn't want to pay the full price because I was used to different kind of price tag, and for me it was like, no, this they do it just for people, they don't want to fall in the trap. I will wait for the email. So next time I essentially would have called you or send an email to your team. And
so you would onboard with us. So we require a short onboarding call, and then once you're onboarded, you then have access via WhatsApp. So you could call us, and but what pretty much all of our customers prefer is you just send a text and are like, hey, I'm in Lisbon, I'm looking to go to Dubai, here are my dates, here's when ideal, here's flexible, and then we will get you a bare minimum of 5% off anything you could book yourself. That being said, sometimes 5 or 10%, that's still an expensive ticket, but we'll always beat whatever you can do yourself. Sometimes there are certain airlines, notably actually from Lisbon, Emirates and TAP, where there is good last minute upgrade availability, but then you're risking it. So most of our customers, they're not comfortable ever flying economy, and they're never comfortable risking it. So they book it with us outright in advance. Our ability to help you when you already have an economy ticket is tough, but one of the many ways that we can get people great deals is actually understanding when there's what we call an instant upgrade arbitrage. So you've probably tracked this yourself, where like sometimes you can book an Emirates flight, and then within 24 hours of the booking, or right at the checkout or right after, they'll say, hey, for only 800 euros, you can get business class. And maybe your economy ticket was 500 and business retailed for 3,000, i.e. through their normal rules, completely kosher, 1,300 euros to go economy plus upgrade, but 3,000 retail. So we have software that knows when that's going to happen and then can offer you a confirmed business class ticket for maybe, let's say, 1,800, and we're doing this on the back end. So
I love it.
I always am super free about the tricks and things that I use because, frankly, I don't use FlyFlat for all of my flights. I love the hacking myself, so I love doing all the things with points and all this stuff. But even for some flights, I'm too busy to do that, so I use my team. But if you don't absolutely love doing the hacks and spending hours, you're not already an expert, it probably doesn't make sense for you to start, especially if you're doing well enough in life that you can consider flying business class.
And also sometimes, even if, like for example, my case recently, I was sure to know very well all the tricks, at least for this specific route. First, I was wrong and I got punished indeed. And it's also, you have mental fatigue. You need constantly to think, what I do, what I should not do.
Yeah.
And to be frank, if I can WhatsApp someone and then they take care of all the, even the stress related to it, they advise me. And if the price is not good for me, I simply may say no.
Exactly.
That's ideal.
And
ideal.
And we can always advise you too, because you're like, hey, here's what I'm trying to spend. How realistic is that? And we can say, not really realistic, or hey, maybe you'll get lucky last minute. Maybe you book a refundable economy ticket and then wait. So you're paying maybe a couple €100 more, a few hundred for a refundable, but now you have a 50% chance of getting a steal on business. So there's all these factors, and it really depends, is route dependent. So working with a combination of experts that are using their own technology to be able to kind of guide you the best way makes sense. And to give you a little tip, if you ever want to do this manually for yourself with the upgrades, don't just chance it and hope that there's going to be an empty seat. You can actually just go on Google Flights and see how many business class seats are related to be sold. So if you can't buy a business class seat online, if you could only buy 3 versus 6 versus 8 or 9, well, odds are you're not going to be able to get that nice upgrade because there's fewer seats. Of course, you can't really know how many of the seats that were bought are refundable, and maybe it's a bunch of people that are just refunding the ticket within 24 hours. But there are kind of rules around this, and that's where kind of our software development has come into play and been fun for us. So we know when there's a good chance of these things happening by just looking at the data of trends and then saying, okay, well, there's this many seats, this is the route, this is what their typical yield is. So this is why we advise you to buy it now versus in the future.
I love it. And before diving into how this magic happens, because this is what we discussed very diffusely during the dinner.
That could be a podcast series.
Why not? Something I wanted to ask you, because many people sometimes in my audience, they are founders or they are working in the tech sector.
Yeah.
And I got very impressed by the quality and the detail level of the investor reports that you do. And you also shared with me or with people maybe in your closer network. And this is something, in my view, great, because it helps also people around you to help you, because you share super transparently. Essentially, it's like the Bezos, annual letter, but every month or every 3 months or whatever. And that's amazing.
Bezos is a big influence on my, quarterly shareholder letters.
That's why, okay.
And it's really, really good. It's very honest. It's mainly in the numbers. And, I definitely don't think I'm at that level, but, it's definitely been a big influence. And I even actually do a weekly report. So this only goes to my actual shareholders and kind of close advisors. But I write a much less polished, not edited weekly report as well that goes on metrics and stuff. And I'm just a big believer that what you measure decides kind of what the outcomes are. And the more that you hold yourself accountable to people and build in public, the more kind of allies you have, the people that are helping. Because I do ask people for intros and stuff all the time, but the nice thing about doing this quarterly shareholder letter that now goes to over 500 people is I'll have people proactively just be like, oh yeah, FlyFlat, and I just met this guy that flew business, So my last one, it's all of the sales we got when I sent that letter a few weeks ago, it's it's material, So advise it strongly for anyone doing it. And definitely the kind of letters that I recommend most are Jeff Bezos, Warren Buffett's. Obviously, everyone loves those. And then someone that you may be familiar with, his name is Ankur Nagpal. He started a company called Teachable, and he's now running a company called Carry, and really big fan of his writing. And he does similar type of like monthly shareholder update, and he has like a public version that just takes away a few numbers and shares that as well. So those, I think, are some good places to start for anyone wanting to do investor letters.
Kudos, it worked fantastically, and that was also one of the reasons why I came to the dinner, we engaged, and I really learned from this approach because it's super detailed. If you don't mind, since you shared it already, do you want to share at which stage your company is, more or less, the figures, that annual revenues, this kind of stuff?
Yeah, for sure. So right now we're doing $20 million run rate of like gross revenue or gross bookings. So that means, based on this last month, if that happened 12 times, we'd have $20 million that our customers pay us primarily for long-haul premium flights, but also for shorter-haul flights, occasionally economy flights, rental cars, hotels. Because where we're moving towards now is, while our kind of excellence from both the technology and product standpoint is in, delivering the experience and getting deals on premium cabins for long flights, people just love the concierge product. So we're now focusing more on growing with businesses that systematically fly all the time, last minute, one way, business and first class, because that's where we can help them the most. But then not say, hey, go elsewhere for your cars and hotels, just take care of everything for them. So those things are lower margin. So I'm not going to share what my blended take rate is, but what I can tell you is that, for our size, we have by far the kind of highest take rate margins in commercial aviation, because we only really make most of our money when we share in customer savings. So what I always tell people is like, okay, we guarantee 5% off anything you could possibly book yourself directly with the airline. But let's say, we're getting you 40% off. Well, we're making a bunch. If we're getting you 40% off a $10,000 ticket, we're going to make at least $1,000 on our back end. If the ticket is $8,000 and we can only get it for you for 5% off, well, guess what? We're probably breaking even on a kind of ticket basis. So the more money we save our customers, the more money we make. So we're constantly trying to find the customers where we can save them the most, because that's how we make money. Unlike almost every other business that books flights, they're basically just kind of begging airlines for commissions, or third parties that have contracts with airlines for these commissions. And, those are typically very low commissions. And as a result, you don't see a lot of innovation there, because their incentive is not to actually help the traveler. Their customer is the airline. The airline's the one who pays them. With us, our customer is the traveler. So we're kind of more motivated to build our own technology and get better discounts for our folks.
That's great. And by the way, this is at least my take. So every time I fly, I'm surprised how, in my view, they really make the economy experience the worst as possible. So you are forced, or you really aspire to get an upgrade, etc. Because it's one of the few industries where the standard or the entry level is not the minimum level where you have a sense of enjoyment for the service. The minimum level, in my view, sometimes with this, we're both big guys, but I'm very tall. So for me, sometimes I literally don't fit. If there is another tall guy,
of course,
we literally don't fit.
Especially on a low-cost carrier. But yeah, I understand that. But I would also push back, and like, while I'm trying to democratize premium travel over the next decade or two for people, I also have a lot of respect for low-cost carriers and stuff. Like, I don't have a ton of respect for typically how most full-service airlines do economy. But if you look at Ryanair, you can complain about, oh, it's low pitch, it's this, it's that, it's the other. But they've made travel more accessible for way more people.
That's true.
And the reality is, for economy flyers, not so much for business, although it's largely true, but for economy, regardless of what people say, what the actions of the market show is that people just pick the lowest price ticket. They don't care about this, they don't care about that. They say that they care about all these things, but what their revealed preference is that they want the lowest price ticket. And that makes sense, because people work hard for their money, they don't want to part with it, and they can suffer for however many hours, especially if it's a short intra-European flight. So, I'm definitely with you. The economy experience could be way better. I even think the standard business experience can be way better. That's part of why I'm building what I'm building. Eventually, I don't know if I told you this at the dinner, but I plan to operate our own planes and launch Fly Flat Air.
Oh, that's amazing.
But yeah, there's a lot of competition and a lot of folks in air, but there's very little innovation. The kind of most innovative things we've seen are like, oh, let's fly different routes. And that's cool. Like, different routes is great. That's why Ryanair is like the most profitable airline in the world, because they do this point-to-point travel. You've probably heard of it, but for your listeners, if you haven't heard of a YouTube account called Wendover Productions, they do these incredible explainer videos about how airlines make money. It's some of their most watched views. So if you ever want to understand, how low-cost carriers make money, how full-service carriers make money on business class versus premium economy versus first, highly recommend that account. But kind of just getting back to your comment around economy experience, like I'm in this business because I think every aspect of the experience can be massively upgraded. We're wasting tons of money, and still overall airlines don't make money. It's such a low profit margin industry. So I think there's room to make better margins while making customers more happy by just trying some new things and really being connected to the actual customer experience.
100%. And if I work with you, essentially, well, do you want to share a bit of how do you achieve this kind of incredible result? Can you share at least the top line of the magic tools and levers that you can
for
pull
sure.
for? And how much can I save essentially working with you on average?
Yeah, so we average across our long-haul international business and first-class flights 35% off the retail prices. But we're also selective about who we onboard. So we're not going to average 35% off from Lisbon to Dubai. We might average more than that from London to New York. So as a result, we're trying to really onboard the individuals and businesses that go London to New York all the time. So you can actually get as much as 80% off, but again, it's off of what? So when we're getting people 80% off, that's not 80% off a $3,000 flight. That's 80% off a $8,000, $9,000, $10,000 flight. So there's some people that before they met FlyFlat, they bought those $8,000, $10,000, $15,000 business class flights because they needed to be somewhere tomorrow and in 2 days. They wanted to be there at that time, and they could afford to pay for that. And now FlyFlat's just getting them exactly what they did before, but for less. And then we have other people that can't afford doing that and are trying to always look for good value when it comes to flights, and we also serve them as well. So in terms of what we're doing on our back end to get the kind of crazy averages and sometimes as much as 80% off, we're leveraging points and miles in unique ways. So, there's tons of these transferable point currencies in the world, American Express, Chase Ultimate Rewards, Citi. This is kind of a more American-centric thing, although there are kind of some hacky ways that I don't know if we can share on the podcast today, but I can make sure people can get access to those points and miles if they're willing to put in some work over like a 1 or 2 year period, even if they're not American citizens or have a social security number via a green card. There's, doing fun stuff around instant upgrades. There's kind of taking advantage of what's called different point of sales. So sometimes just the jurisdiction in which you're charging the customer, which is based off things like their IP address, based off of what type of credit card they're using. There will be different fares. Sometimes the difference is huge, like 10, 15, 20%. There's currency arbitrage. So there's certain countries that have really volatile currencies, and sometimes the airlines don't catch up their pricing to the actual intramarket, moves of the day. There's lots of fun stuff we're doing. The kind of biggest crown jewels of how we do stuff are not for the podcast. We talked a little bit about that at dinner, but rest assured, we take an approach where we have this diversified portfolio of really cool travel hacks, and we leverage them to make sure that our customers are always getting the best rate. So when you come to us, if we're getting you 5% off only, that it's not worth your time to check X, Y, and Z, because that is actually the best price.
That's great. And I'm curious, if we step back for a moment, Zach, I would be interested to know more about how you started this business, why you felt, intrigued by this direction. Because from a user perspective, I've been and I still am a heavy user, I would say, of flights, and maybe too much. So, and I that's why I was like, wow, I knew that it was possible to engineer a system and productize this, because by myself, sometimes I tried, sometimes I succeeded, other times I didn't, to be frank, and I paid, unfortunately, maybe full prices, etc. The American credit card, direction, I have a few friends who recommended me to do it, but I was not able to do it yet. And the jurisdiction thing, I did it successfully, especially with China. This at least at the time it worked very well.
Nice. And it's always changing. So that's why software is coming, because it takes a lot to stay on top of it manually to know all of that.
But it's a full-time job, and you can never compete with a.
I mean, I have a 70-person team now, and we're still have a lot to go. So it's.
How did you come up with the idea or the iteration?
Yeah, so this actually started as I kind of became, in your words, like a global citizen. So I grew up in New York, and then after I finished high school, before I started college, I lived for a year in Jerusalem, and that kind of totally changed my life. So prior to that, I was pretty obsessive about music and poker, and in school, I did well on pretty much everything except for language. I like sucked in Spanish class. So I was like, okay, I'm good at these other things. I'm not a language guy. And growing up in America, largely spending my time in America, kind of this very American-centric view of like, okay, well, I speak English and I'm not going to learn some other ones. Why bother? And then after living in Jerusalem, it was like, oh, wow, actually being somewhere for more than a week, for me now, it's like I want to, when you're around people and they can't really express themselves in your language, you want to express yourself in their language and better understand the cultural nuances. And so while I was there, I initially tried to learn both Hebrew and Arabic, and then ended up just based on kind of my work and social life, learned Hebrew over the little bit of course that year, and then came back the next summer and taught music to children in Hebrew, and that really solidified it. And that experience was like, okay, wow, like I now want to live abroad. I was super excited about after that year being like, okay, I'm going to finish college and then I'm going to go like live in a few different places, like each for like 1 to 3 years. I'm going to like learn the language, learn about the culture, and just like keep repeating that. And I was really set on doing that. So I got to kind of decent conversational fluency in Hebrew, and there's okay, well, I want to go back. First summer I went back, and I did it on kind of like college grant dime, but I was like, okay, well, I'm going to have more trips coming up, so like how am I going to do this? And I have always valued my time very heavily, and I'm like, okay, I could like work a job and make X dollars and then save up a lot to buy like one ticket to Europe. And that didn't seem like a very attractive use of my time. So I was like, okay, what are the ways that I can now travel for less or even closer to free? And growing up in the United States, I had access to this incredible points and miles system. So and now there's so much information online. There's still a lot of the good stuff. You have to kind of know the right people, try it yourself. But I went on Reddit/r churning, which is now blown up. At the time, it was like much smaller, much more niche. This was actually just after this kind of incredible mint, U.S. Mint arbitrage manufacturer spending. As a non-American, you probably don't know about this. So the U.S. Mint wanted to put more $1 coins in circulation. So they offered to basically waive credit card transaction fees and shipping on buying $1 coins. So what did people do? They maxed out all their credit cards to earn the points, took the coins to the bank, and I don't think the U.S. Mint was very successful in circulating more dollars, but a lot of people I know made literally millions of dollars of points before they shut down that loophole. So basically, I learned about all this stuff, and by the time college finished, I opened almost 300 credit cards, and I manufactured over $100 million of spend. So that's what manufactured spending, which is basically spending money on a cash equivalent or something, and then using that money to pay off the credit card. So what I did specifically is I'd go to like a pharmacy, I'd buy these Visa gift card debit cards where you can buy up to $1,000 worth of it and pay $5.95. Then I would take that gift card, which would code as a debit card at the post office.
Wow.
And then I would buy a money order with that, and that would cost 35 cents. So we're looking at, 60 basis points now, $6-ish for $1,000 of spend. And then I'd take a photo of the money order with my online banking app, and then that would pay off the credit card that bought that. So I would be earning about, depending on the credit card and how you valued it, usually at least $10 worth of points or miles. But most importantly, a lot of these had these bonuses. So spend once and get some money. But the really good bonus is you have to spend $2,000, $3,000, $5,000. So I would manufacture the spend to get that bonus. So I did that about 300 times. By the time I'm done with college, I'm not just flying basically for free. I'm flying in business class close to for free. And now, it's about 12 years later, and I haven't flown coach on a long haul flight, and I've like never paid for it since then. So this is very much like, I know this is the long story, but it's a huge passion for me. And before I started this business, I manually did all of these hacks for myself, for my friends, for my family for years. So I started a travel startup at the end of college. That was a great product and a horrible business that failed. And then kind of on the side to other business ventures, I had these kind of consulting businesses that were around miles and points. And then what kind of started the Fly Flat side hustle was actually going to just a random lunch where I learned kind of about more of the details around how miles and points are bought and sold, especially within the religious Jewish community. And then I kind of became closer to the people in that community, ended up kind of gaining the trust of a lot of key people and starting to do a lot of business with them. And then that was kind of the moment where it's like, oh, okay, I don't just have to help people with their own miles and points to do what I did. I can just give them a cash price, and I just happen to do it over WhatsApp because that's just what was easiest for me. And then that just kind of naturally grew, and I was kind of too stupidly focused on crypto and other stuff to go all in on this business. So this was actually a side business of mine that just kept growing and growing. And then eventually, a little over a year ago, I was like, okay, I got to go all in on Fly Flat. And I did that, and it's been good. So, what started as kind of just me brought on someone else, my partner Cameron shortly after that. And now we're, at about 70 people, and we're not just kind of manually doing these things. We are building software to make it more efficient.
So essentially, from a certain angle, is from 100 million of manufactured actually spending to 20 million around of gross revenue. This is a big deal.
Yeah, something like that. We're going to get to 100 million hopefully within the next year or so.
Of course. I mean, the trajectory is there. It's super exciting. Wow. This is, for me, it's partially an entire new universe, because for sure this point system with American credit card, to be frank, it's something that from a European perspective, it's less, new, but it's so
still, it's still possible. So like,
interesting.
You have less options if you're not going to play the kind of back end, get the American credit system. But, in the UK, you have a lot more options. And I don't think you don't have a ton of great options in Portugal. You can basically only earn tap miles. But you can get German credit cards where you can earn Lufthansa, and the Lufthansa group has more extensible miles than tap miles. So there's still all sorts of stuff you can do even if you're not American. But it started with kind of the points arbitrage and hack, and that's what we used to do. And now that's only a really small percentage of our overall revenue. We have way more other things that we do beyond that. So I just got really lucky. Like, this is a passion of mine. Like, even now today, like at night, if I want to like relax or if I can't sleep and I want to do something, I like look up what would be the absolute ideal flight and the way to book it for myself for like a dream vacation I might not even book, So like, for example, I love Japan. I don't think it's highly probable I'll go, but probably at least 30% based on just, something I learned recently about going to Japan in April. So I then basically scoured things. I set up alerts using a combination of our own software and external software, and deal an ANA first class, which is one of the Japanese carriers, and for me, the nicest first class I've ever experienced in the sky. I've done ANA first a couple times from California to Tokyo. A seat popped up from London. So I got that, and now I like have this kind of speculative first class flight for myself from London to Tokyo. So a lot of people that have been in this kind of miles and points game for a while, if you look at their calendars, what you'll see is they have like 20 flights, and they'll maybe only take 5 to 7 of them, but those are really, really good deals, because sometimes to get the truly, truly best deals with miles and points, you have to kind of book in advance and like book your travel based on the deal. Not like, hey, here's one is ideal, which again, most people with money are not going to do that. But this is kind of how you can always, if you want to be like me and be like, I'm never paying retail, I'm only going to get a good deal, this is kind of the work that you have to do. So Fly Flat's there to kind of, you're never going to get as good a deal as what Zach's going to do for himself for the most part, with my own points that I earn from running the business that are tax-free. But, we'll get you a better cash price than what you can get yourself.
But why not, especially if you can work remotely in a pretty agile way? If you have flexibility of 2, 3, even 7 days, more or less, why not? If you save 50% of the ticket and the experience is great and you enjoy more the experience, why not? Especially because what I noticed, but again, maybe it's a difference between when you're in your 20s or 30s, the flight experience objectively changes completely the whole. You go to a conference for 7 days, there is already a jet lag. If you can sleep, if you cannot sleep, this changes completely your experience. So totally in. This will be very interesting. I'm once I become member to ask you, okay, send me in October somewhere in the best, place. These are the requirements. Go, and it's also funny, right? You don't know where you are going to land and in which precise dates, right?
For sure.
Can I ask you, coming back on, because the main driver for me for doing this interview is to connect with people here in Lisbon in person or online that I find interesting, especially because of this kind of location-independent kind of life story. Why Jerusalem in your case, and in which other cities or countries did you live? And can you come back on maybe on the drivers that brought you in the end to Lisbon compared to what? Because for my audience, for me, it would be interesting. Okay, an American guy, New York, Austin, and then according to certain
few places in between.
Okay.
Yeah. So Jerusalem, a number of reasons. So I'm Jewish, so there's like a natural connection to kind of Israel. And then I also attended this really incredible program called Seeds of Peace, which is like a summer camp that brings largely Israelis and Palestinians, but also kind of a small number of Americans, Egyptians, and Jordanians together to do like a traditional American summer camp with one twist where you have like intense dialogue about the kind of conflict for 2 hours, 5 or 6 days a week. And that experience just kind of like totally opened my eyes to like just what other people's life experiences can be about, like how lucky and privileged I was to grow up in a safe, loving home without, plagued by violence my entire life in some way. And I met a lot of, American camp counselors there that had the experience of spending a year between high school and college, like volunteering and working on something. So after that experience, like, okay, I wanna do that. And because of doing it with Seeds of Peace, it naturally felt, okay, I want to go to, where my fellow campers and the people I became friends with are from and see if I can, learn and do what I can to help there. So I went there for a year. And then while I was in college, I had this incredible dean at the music. So I studied music in school, and the dean of one of the deans of the conservatory, a guy named Chris Jenkins, he had a friendship with the cultural attaché or the head of culture and music at the Jordanian embassy, which the American embassy in Jordan, which for people that don't know, it's almost like a satellite embassy for a lot of the Middle East because Jordan's like a very safe country for Americans relative to a lot of the other Middle East. So it's a very big embassy, and they have a budget to bring American culture to Jordan and the Middle East. So we ended up doing a bunch of concerts and workshops in Jordan, and I met this incredible composer named Tariq Al-Nasser. And I ended up doing an internship with him over the summer. Again, another kind of grant through my college. And then after college ended, I actually moved to Jordan to join their national orchestra and to work with Tariq. I had my kind of Miles and Points consulting business and had my kind of poker podcast and like poker coaching business. So those were like things that I can do a small amount of time and make a lot of money. But I was really more about like learning Arabic, learning music. And then, about 6 weeks into being there, my father unexpectedly passed away. So my plan of staying there for longer changed, and my kind of whole priorities in life changed, where up until then, basically from when I lived in Jerusalem until then when I was 24, I was like, I want to see the world. I want to go to see other places, do other cool things. And after that, I wanted to be more around like people that were more similar to me. And I ended up moving to the Bay Area and living with my cousin, who's been a successful entrepreneur and has been a mentor to me. He basically being in the Bay Area in 2017, 2018 made me catch the crypto bug. And, after that, I ended up, kind of going all in on crypto and blockchain with most of my time and starting a fund. And that's what I focused on in the Bay Area. Then COVID hit. And like a lot of people that are listening know, the Bay Area was not the best place to be during COVID. And I did a kind of like mini offsite for my small fund team in Austin. And during the lockdowns, and I was like, oh my God, it's like real life again. So I just moved to Austin because I was like so not happy in the Bay Area, and who knows when the lockdowns are going to end. And then, in Austin, meet an amazing woman. And then, she's grown up all over the world, much more international than myself. And when she wanted to move somewhere else, we both were like, yeah, like we don't need to stay in the States. So that was very nice. And that's kind of my journey. The one, I guess, location missing was I went to school in Ohio in the Midwest. So
in Ohio,
kind of New York area, Ohio, Jerusalem, Ohio, Amman, Jordan for a little bit, San Francisco, Austin here, and I have no plans to move. Lisbon's awesome. So
that's fantastic. And this brings me to one question that I think in your case becomes, I'm generally interested in learning what is your experience of Europe from, of course, the perspective of Portugal and Lisbon particularly, and how do you compare it with the US?
Yeah, so
honestly,
my sample size is just so small, like I've been here for a year and a half. I've spent at least 3.5 of those months not in Portugal, probably closer to 4 or 4.5. And I've just been working so hard on my business and, living with my partner for the first time. And like, it just, so I just want to preface that like my sample size is small and there's so much about Lisbon and Portugal and Europe that I've still yet to experience. But I think a big part of why we were both excited about Portugal, that's not just about it's kind of a more ephemeral, which is just people are more relaxed here. So I'm like, a like very hardworking like guy from New York, which is kind of like a little bit of an opposite vibe to being like laid back and relaxed. And so despite me, being here, I'm still a lot more New York than I am Portuguese, European, Southern Europe. And I don't think that will ever change. But I do notice that I'm a lot more relaxed here. And when I have American friends visit, or if I hear Americans in the street, my chest, like it does just feel like there's just more anxiety in the air. And especially going back to New York City, of course, I'm going there in a week. It's like a completely different story. So I think the main thing that I noticed in, especially in Southern Europe, in Portugal, Spain, but Europe more broadly, is just people are a lot more relaxed. And I think that's like downstream of a lot of really awesome cultural things. So I don't think I have like that many unique takes on the differences between America and Europe. You're writing about it all the time on X, but yeah, I think for me, I tend to like overwork myself, and so being in an environment where there's more
balances.
Yeah, it's good for me. I think a lot of people, love moving to like a New York or San Francisco to like work a lot more, and I think that's like great for a lot of people. But for me, I've like come close to burnout a lot of times because I just kept like pushing and pushing and pushing. So being around, a place and a people where that is not the kind of like normal thing to do has had a lot of benefits for me. Of course, there's all the drawbacks of that, but overall, the balance for me makes a lot of sense. And there's just also so many other particular things about Portugal that are fantastic. So again, yeah, I don't plan to leave. I'm going to plan to start learning Portuguese at some point when things cool down with Fly Flat. Because, the other places I've lived, like I still probably, speak slightly better Arabic than I do Portuguese, which is insane given how little I spent there. But I took a language course and I work with a private teacher. Here it's like, I'm not 24, I'm 31, 32, have people that I employ versus there. So the responsibilities really matter. And it's not, I don't think Portuguese will be that hard relative to learning Hebrew or Arabic, but it just takes time and commitment that I haven't put in yet.
There's a season for everything.
Yeah.
So maybe next year or in 2 years, the Portuguese as a language is not going to run away, right?
Exactly. And I'm going to be here, so I'm not, I'm confident I will learn Portuguese. And again, as you said, there's seasons for different things, and the recent season for me is just going really deep into Fly Flat, growing and scaling, and that's what feels great. So that's why it's also hard for me to kind of comment, because for me, like so much of my European experience is like taking calls at least 3 days a week until end of day New York hours and being at my office, and but the nice thing has been like, especially over the summer, dinners happen later here, so I can take calls until 8 p.m., 8:30 p.m. and then just go to dinner, and that's like I'm not like doing necessarily like a late dinner in the way that you would in the US. So, and
one topic that we what about your current team? Are you employing people in the US, in Portugal, elsewhere?
All over the world. So in terms of geographies where it's like the most, so it's like India is the most, then the Philippines, then Argentina, then probably the US, and then 1, 2, 3 people in a bunch of different other countries, including Portugal. So in Portugal, where my office is and where I have like that's the only Portuguese. That's the only headquarters is technically in Portugal in terms of like a actual physical office, but we're like a global and remote team. We're a U.S. corporation because that's where I started the company, and has a lot of benefits to be a U.S. corporation. But yeah, I'm a big believer in working with the best people regardless of culture, skin color, geography. And I think for companies that are willing to do that and to take the time to develop excellence in it, because it takes a lot of time, it's a lot easier to hire people that are kind of more similar to you in the same culture and the same geography. But it's had a lot of benefits for us being like a fully remote and global team, because there's all different shades of remote. But like to me, if you're actually going to be remote, you might as well take advantage of the fact that like there's people that live everywhere in the world,
Zach, I loved all these, topics and angles. Maybe, I just have one extra question, if you don't mind, which is on an adjacent topic, because, you have been an investor, also professionally in crypto with your own fund, which has a very cool name, by the way, Unbounded. What's your take about, global mobility, location-independent life and work, and Bitcoin?
Yeah. So I think that it's great to have pressure on governments to improve their services. And when you have a monopoly on violence, having like real pressure to change is like pretty difficult, because like in business, it's like you have to make money or you go out of business, where governments like, you have to like really, really fuck up to like have the entire government or the state apparatus go away. As a default, it's kind of there. So I think a problem with whether it's, democracy or other systems is that, change can be very slow, which for certain things has its benefits, but for a lot of things it doesn't have its benefits. So I think more of these kind of like city states making it easier to kind of move somewhere either by investment or showing a given amount of income. What that does is it basically puts pressure on governments that are not giving a good value proposition for what they require from you, whether it's taxes or military service or whatever, and allowing people to get a better value proposition. And the more people that I think are willing to move somewhere, it's kind of just one person at a time, but overall as that trend increases, what I hope is that it makes for just better governance, better governments worldwide, and governments that actually serve the people better because they understand that, okay, well, if we're not serving our people well, we might lose our tax revenue and the ability to do stuff. So I think still probably most governments today, no one really in power feels like the pressure to do that, but that's something that I think that is a really beautiful thing about kind of global mobility and being able to move places. And I'm a really big fan of also the way Portugal has done it, because so many of these kind of e-citizenship by investment, it's while I think it's fantastic, and I think as a country you want to ideally make sure that the immigrants that you take in are, adding value in some way, and that's like a great way to do it. I think it also leaves a lot of people out who could add value. So something like the digital nomad visa here in Portugal, or the kind of passive income visa. These are great things because the barriers to entry is still low, but anyone that's getting on those visas is a lot more likely to contribute to kind of spending in business in Portugal than the average Portuguese citizen is. So I think like programs like that, where it's, you're seeing some innovation in the U.S. This like $5 million, one that you've written about, but I think more where it's like, hey, if you're good at your job and you could like make a good amount more money, or even just some more money than the average person in our country, like we want you. And I think a big part of what historically has made the United States such a great country is that it's attracted kind of the best and the brightest from around the world. Yeah. Unfortunately, right now, government policy is actively turning away the best and brightest. So I hope that, more countries follow in the example of, kind of Portugal's system design, and maybe, I don't know what the best example is. You probably know better than me. Maybe like an Emirati execution, in terms of like speed and ease of actually getting the visa.
I definitely agree, and I'm more or less always writing and commenting about these topics, and I still don't have the final recipe, right? That's why I'm writing and asking questions, because I'm learning, and I'm personally a fan of Singapore specifically for many reasons. I think they did a terrific job. And another question which is adjacent is, you mentioned to me last time something about tax optimization setup and something like this. Not sure. Do you have something to share on this topic?
I mean, a lot. I think that like in many ways the same like muscle and around like flight hacking is very similar to kind of like tax optimization, tax hacking, whatever you want to call it. So I don't have like enough income or complex enough income where there's like a crazy amount of stuff for me to do, but like when I've met very wealthy investors that have a lot of it honestly, it excites the hell out of me to be like, oh, well, are you doing this and this, So I think, some of the things we talked about at dinner that I think a lot of Americans don't know is, if you own like a USC corporation, which if you want to build a big business, especially if you're American, like it's going to be really hard for the USC Corp to not be the right option for you, especially if you're not, intending to take profits early on and you want to have other shareholders and investors. But if you ever start doing dividends, I mean, now you're paying, the 21% corporate tax. What a lot of people don't know is that you can have a subsidiary of that C Corp where that basically makes the profits, and then you're only paying half of those corporate taxes in the United States. So you can, let's say, have, a subsidiary corporation in another country that gets those profits, And then when you distribute them to your American investors from your American C Corp, you're no longer paying 21%, you're paying 10.5%. So that's not relevant for us now because, we're not making a net profit and don't intend to anytime soon because there's a lot of things to invest in, reinvest in our business. But yeah, that's kind of one. And then another one that people don't know about is just as an American, moving abroad is huge because as America is one of the few places where citizenship, you pay taxes, no ifs, ands, or buts.
For now.
Yes. But, if you are an American and, make under $150K a year and you live not in the United States, you basically don't have to pay any taxes. So that I'm sure you've heard of the foreign earned income exclusion and then the
126, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah, I think that's what it was for last year. And then there's like, depending on what city you're in, like 20 to 45K of like housing and other allowance stuff. So basically for most kind of cities around the world, 150. So that's, I think if building wealth is important and you're an American, like moving to a place where there's a lower cost of living and where you don't pay taxes can really, really help with the compounding. But to kind of come back to something I want to say around location, which is like, while on a systems level, I'm really happy that people can move to different places and there's more of these opportunities and there's more acceptance. Again, it's still not like widely and we're in a bubble where it's accepted, but like it's growing. Like it's definitely more accepted than it was 30 years ago and then was more accepted than probably 30 years before that. I do think there's something really special about having roots somewhere, And I think that like staying in one place, building community, building roots, building routines, traditions, rituals, having people that always come to your house for X holiday. I think that's like really special and what's kind of, an unfortunate, big trade-off when it comes to, all of the benefits from a lifestyle and tax, cultural perspective when you move somewhere different. Yeah. So I think a lot of people, and again, I've done a lot of traveling in my life and it's, been great to see the world, but like the type of travel, like I think it's a lot more fulfilling to experiment with some places and then pick and commit somewhere sooner, And I think a lot of people in the kind of world of global citizenship and like end up kind of just bounce around from place to place. And for me, while I love optimizing flights and taxes, like I'm never going to like try to optimize so much that I won't live exactly where I want to live. And there's a lot of people, having been in crypto, having visited Puerto Rico, that like, are just like complaining all the time about, I have to live in Puerto Rico. It's the only place I can't play that. It's like, you don't have to do anything, man. Like life is short. You shouldn't live somewhere you don't want to live. And I think that is often lost within the conversations around like living in different places because we know it in Portugal, like you don't have to compromise to have a good situation, like in Portugal and other places you can get a hell of a lot of things. So I think anyone that's like listening to your podcast regularly and are like, oh, well, maybe I can save, 17% more if I live in Dubai, but I don't really want to live in Dubai. Like don't live in Dubai. Just like experiment and go to places primarily because you feel good about living there, can see building a life there. And, if on the margins there's tax stuff or whatever, like I met a guy that in Puerto Rico once was pitching on my fund many years ago, and he was like an angel investor in Canva's seed round. Oh. So he personally was, basically once he sold his shares, tens of millions of dollars, even though it was a small check because it's, such a unicorn huge successful upside, company. Yeah. So he's like, I'm going to live in Puerto Rico for like 2 or 3 years, whatever his tax person recommended, so that I save like, $15 million on capital gains compared to living in New York. I'm like, okay, well that makes sense. But I just have met so many people that fall into the trap of just like kind of the next thing. And it's all about like optimizing these little things that you miss on optimizing what really matters, which is around like connection and health and yeah.
This is absolutely gold. I think it's the key recommendation, and I can expand it so much. But for example, many cities like Dubai, for example, one of the most untold secrets of Dubai for multiple people is that it's a city so active and energetic, but at the same time, you need to take the car for going everywhere. And sometimes Dubai is a place that tend to isolate people. So if you like Dubai, then okay, you get also the pros. But it depends on the situation, because maybe you save, I don't know, 30K in taxes, but then you need to spend 25K for international school for your kid.
Exactly.
So taxes, in my view, I always say this, should be part of a broader consideration for optimizing, a kind of version of yourself and your family that can allow you and your family to express at best. And in my view, what has to be optimized is the capacity and capability of expressing yourself. And taxes is one component only. I completely agree.
Yeah.
And I don't hear many people telling that so lucidly, and so I completely agree with you. Also because sometimes, you pay 5K more of taxes this year, but if the place where you are, makes you happy, you are more energized, then you can eventually produce more. So it's...
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we've seen this now playing out with New York City. So I don't know if you follow these trends, but like you had a ton of New Yorkers move to Florida, Austin as well.
Of course.
And now Florida real estate is like in free fall because so many people that moved to
Came back,
Florida
right?
are coming back because even though New York, and San Francisco have the worst taxes, there's a fucking energy there.
There is
and
energy.
It's undeniable, and
That's
they're
the story.
great cities. Yeah.
The story of Pomp, Anthony Pompliano, he moved to Miami. Do you remember during COVID, etc.? Because Miami became the new big thing, and even from San Francisco, like founders, fund guys, all people essentially from SF wanted to move to Miami. But yeah, you're right, and people, it's so true. So from one, I completely subscribe to it. Where should I, if I want to learn more about FlyFlat? It's flyflat.com, right?
Yeah, just flyflat.com. So we actually relatively recently acquired flyflat.com. It's been a whole
congrats.
saga. We were fly-flat for years. And
That's why I asked you, because I remember...
I know, we just couldn't get a hold of the person, but we finally own flyflat.com. So just flyflat.com, and that will, for now, redirect to fly-flat.com, and soon we'll merge it all, and the redirect will happen the other way. Maybe even by the time this airs.
That's that's amazing. I mean, Zach, thank you so much for joining me. Why not in a couple of months come back? I mean, I want to hear about the updates of yourself and why not also of the business. But thank you so much for all these perspectives. And to anyone listening, I hope you enjoyed this interview. I'm going to do more and more interviews like with people I generally find interesting, all in this kind of intersection of global citizenship, global mobility, global living, and maybe some government accelerationism, something like this. I think it's quite the vertical. And thank you so much, man. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure, man. Thanks for having me.